So welcome everybody to our fourth programme of Native Creatives. It's nice to see some familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Jen Langascoff, I'm the Education Programme Manager at Festival Bridge here in Norwich. I use the she, her pronouns, and I have a brown bob haircut with a short fringe, and I'm wearing, or sometimes I'm wearing glasses, and I have a leopard print top on. The theme for our Spring 2022 programme is sharing conversations with artists and arts and cultural organisations, listen, learn and build sustainable partner relationships for personal and professional creativity. We've also included a sub-theme around digital creativity, which will be reflected by a number of our speakers. If you haven't booked in for any of the other sessions, please do. Izzy, our comms officer, will post all the links into the chat box. If you've not come to one of our programmes before, we're here to support all teachers of the creative arts, primary arts teachers, artist educators, and all those who believe in the value and benefits of the arts in education. We're here to help develop both your personal and professional practice and hope to continue to expand our network of Native Creatives members. If you haven't already, please join our Facebook group. Again, it will be posted in the chat box, where we invite you to share your creative, personal and professional challenges and successes. Ask us and each other for support of any kind and keep the conversation around arts and culture and education alive. You can also follow us on Twitter or use the hashtag Native Creatives. We have a strong and varied lineup of speakers over the next 2 weeks. You'll notice that we've adjusted the format to 1 session a day over 6 as a response to the feedback from you. And it's crucial for us to develop each programme with you at the very heart. So please just take a few minutes at the end of each session to give us your thoughts and suggestions on the Jamboard. Again, Izzy will post it into the chat box and we'll post it now and again at the end of the session. If you would like a certificate of attendance, then please download it also from the chat box. We will be recording each session, although it'll only be Amal and myself that will be seen, and I encourage you to leave your cameras on. But please feel free to ask questions as we're going along. Amal's really happy to answer anything. If you want me to pose them to our speakers, then I can do that. Or if you want to raise your hand emoji, then please do that as well. But there will be an opportunity for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. For this particular session, I've invited Laura, who is our Festival Bridge officer, to introduce our first expert guest speaker, as she's had the privilege of working with her at the Serpentine Galleries before she joined us at Festival Bridge. So not to waste any more of our precious time, over to you, Laura.
Thank you. So as Jen mentioned, I'm Laura Algar and I'm currently in post as Festival Bridge Officer. I use she, her pronouns. I have a ponytail and I'm wearing a blue blouse. For today's session, we're delighted to welcome curator and artist Amal Khalaf. As Jen mentioned, we met at the Serpentine and I've always been in awe of the richness of Amal's projects. She's often said that her curatorial practice is one of listening, something that's clearly exemplified by the empathy and the collaborative philosophy embedded within everything that she does. As some of you may already know, Amal is in post as civic curator at the Serpentine Galleries, where she's worked on the Edgware Road project since its inception in 2009. She's also director of programmes at Cubit, one of London's oldest and most established artist-run co-ops, which is based in Islington in London. Here and in other contexts, she's developed residencies, exhibitions and collaborative research projects at the intersection of art and social justice, and recently launched Support Structures, a fellowship and grant programme for artists working in the field of community practice and spatial politics. She's a founding member of artist collective GCC, and recently she curated Sensing the Planet, a gathering of musicians, artists and climate justice activists in Dartington, Devon. In 2019, she curated Bahrain's Pavilion for Venice, and in 2018, she curated or co-curated an international arts and social justice conference called Rights to the City in London. And in 2016, she co-directed the 10th edition of the Global Art Forum in Art Dubai. So she's busy, and we're very lucky to have her with us today. So Amal, with that, I'll hand over to you.
Oh, thank you so much. And also thank you, Laura. It's so wonderful to get to still be connected to you, even though we're not in Kensington Gardens. And thank you to Native Creatives and to all of you for joining the conversation today. So as Laura mentioned, my name's Amal and I am all of those things that Laura mentioned, but I thought I'd maybe just start off just because we're talking practitioner to practitioner. I'm just wanted to give a bit of a background as to how I got to where I am, and then maybe go into a bit of a presentation on the work that I'm doing, work that artists I'm working with and commissioning are doing, and maybe a general approach to what it means to really be bringing your practice outside of a studio or a classroom or institutional setting, because that's what I'm most excited about expanding the field of art into the world as it from where it emerged, I believe. So yeah, so I actually grew up in the Middle East, and I grew up on a tiny island, and there weren't art museums or galleries, but there were lots of creative people and lots of artists. I never went to art school actually, and I thought that was like something I really wanted to start with. In my work as an artist and a curator, I'm really interested in practices rather than being defined by like a technique or a methodology or any other kind of frame. And I'm often working with people, and I'm influenced by maybe non-artists as a main type of reference for how I do work. I'm really interested in working with people. So a lot of my references actually come from radical pedagogy, social movements, looking at art education, just looking at ways of being together and looking at other forms of practice that just involve convening. And for me, those are my references. Those are my references rather than thinking about an art movement or an artist. So I just wanted to preface what I'm doing with a little bit of that background. I come from actually a documentary filmmaking background. I used to work in the BBC, and I guess the thing that drives me the most is the desire to tell stories about the world that help us understand our world better, but also stories which are about change and a desire for change. And I think as artists, we are best placed to do that. So I'm just going to start my presentation now, and I'm going to share my screen. So let's see if this works. Can you all see my screen? Can you see it move? Great.
Perfect, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so I guess I wanted to start with this quote. So I'm going to read from it. This is I've been starting a lot of my talks recently with this little haiku and the text that follows. And this is from a book called Carceral Capitalism from Jackie Wang. So it's a book basically about abolition, but I was really interested in how she writes and how she talks about poets or artists. She starts off with this haiku by Sonia Sanchez that says, "Without your residential breath, I lose my timing. Our bodies are not closed loops. We hold each other and keep each other in time by marching, singing, embracing, breathing. We synchronize our tempos so we can find a rhythm through which the urge to live can be expressed collectively. And in this way, we set the world in motion. In this way, poets become the timekeepers of the revolution." And I really wanted to talk about this idea that I hold really strong, that we as people that are educators or art administrators, we have a role as timekeepers of the revolution. We have a role in thinking about where we are, where we live, and the future of the places that we're working and living in. And as artists, I believe that we are the ones that can support wider publics with the tools to imagine otherwise. And I think that imagining otherwise is the thing that, we can always talk about imagination. We can talk about the need for art and creativity. But I think it's really about this like being able to even create space for others to imagine, which is a radical act. And I think that's something that art teachers are doing on the daily and artists in general are doing it. There's this other speaker called, this writer called Mia Mingus. She's actually a disability justice advocate, and she says, it's somewhere later in this book, but she has this quote which says, "We're building a reality that we've never seen before, and we're asking people to flex their visioning and dreaming skills, something that's not readily supported in our society." So just to begin, like before I describe any of the projects I've been working on, I really want to just leave that there, and maybe we can return to this when we have a discussion at the end about this idea that artistic practice is offering a technology to dream new futures. I called this talk "Listening to the City," just because I think that's something about locating yourself as a practitioner is really, really important to anything, anything that we're doing as artists, as makers. So I'm really sorry. My cat has found her treats and is currently breaking the bag of treats and eating them in the kitchen and being really naughty. I'm not going to get up. I'm going to let her do it, but please excuse the noise. So this slide right here is just a space. I wanted to show you a map of where I think I learned a lot of the things I'm going to share with you today. So this is a map of the Edgware Roads and Hyde Park. So I work at the Serpentine where Laura used to work, and it's, for those of you who haven't been to Hyde Park or Kensington Gardens, you can see here the tip of it right on the bottom of this slide, the bottom left. And I, for about 5 years, was working on this road, the Edgware Road, where you can see a little speech bubble written there. And it was there that I really got a big initiation into learning about histories of social movements and how we as artists and practitioners can learn from them. And it was through setting up a project called the Center for Possible Studies, or the Edgware Road Project, which was a residency program and a very loose kind of neighborhood project, which would invite different artists, schools, teachers, market stall holders, restaurant owners, cafe workers, and activists from the area to gather together, and somehow we would develop our own possible studies. And the whole idea of creating the name, the Center for Possible Studies, as an art project was really because we entered this road and realized that actually this road was about to undergo a massive change. So at the top of Edgware Road was one of the largest areas of social housing in Westminster, in fact, in London, and it was about to be privatized. So this was back in 2009 that this was happening. Now that area is completely privatized, where it used to be many, many homes right in the heart of one of the most expensive boroughs in the country. It became privatized, and there were many, many other a lot of gentrification was happening to kind of match up the desire for a luxury look in that neighborhood. And so we started to think about what is the role of arts institutions, what is the role of artists as people that are here on this road that are witnessing all of these changes. And so this sentence I put up here, this work originates in the, I can't read it right now, in the belief that it's possible to reorient a series of existing practices to the desires of a local community, is really like just a different way to think about what artists and what art can be in a context where a lot of difficult things are happening in a neighborhood, for example. I think we can equally think about this in relation to anywhere we're working in. So if we're talking about what's been happening to the education industry over the last 10 years and the kind of shrinking budgets for arts, for example. I mean, we could start to think about our work in relation to telling that story in a different way, for example. So I just wanted to kind of ground in where I started to listen to the city. This is an image of the space. So you can see here lots of different things happening. So I was really interested in what other space could we create that wasn't a museum space, that didn't have like a small education room, that had workshops that would happen every now and then, and an exhibition in another room. What would happen if we created a different type of art space? And so this was a space where we would have community groups meeting at the same time as artists making a project, at the same time as a workshop was happening for a theater project we were doing. And we were trying to think about what are the many ways we can be just interacting with each other. We also set up a printing press here, a risograph. This was back in 2010, 2011. And we invited people in the community just to use the risograph to print whatever they needed, as long as it was for a social cause. And so artists and graphic designers were also using the same thing, and somehow natural, organic collaborations were made. And I think a lot of learnings happened, learnings way beyond what I even know, because I was there facilitating it. But I just want to say there were like about 50 possible studies that were created. Some of them were led by artists and others were led by community organizations, often around a campaign. For example, we worked around immigration raids. We worked around the closing down, the threat to a local market. We worked around so many different types of issues, and it was somehow would create a context for artists to create artworks about it, but it would also allow artists to be supporting different communities to producing the kind of things they needed to tell their story. And this is the space. This is these are some images of the site I was working in. So I'm very much influenced by the practice and teachings of Paulo Freire. I don't know if Paulo Freire has come up in Native Creatives before. No? Is there anyone here that knows of his work, Pedagogy of the Yes, Susan, yeah. Yeah, so right here is a learning from Paulo Freire here. And for me, this is actually how I plan every single project I do in this methodology. And so I'd really encourage all of you to read up about Paulo Freire if you're at all interested in kind of liberatory education or education for freedom historically. So Paulo Freire was a theologian and a priest and a literacy teacher, and he was going around Brazil in the 70s when it was undergoing dictatorship, and he would go around and teach people how to read and write. Lots of poorer communities that were being oppressed by their landlords and the government and the really like kind of unsupportive situation that many Brazilians found themselves in the 70s. I mean, there were whole amazing art and music movements that were emerged from this anti-totalitarian kind of moment that Brazil had. But one of the most amazing gifts of that moment was Freire. And basically he started to talk about a non-hierarchical, a flatter way to be in relation, to understand what teaching is. So he was against this idea that a teacher would give lectures to a room, and he instead said that every teacher is also a student, and together it's like in a process of exchange that everybody learns. And through that process of everybody learning together, only then a change or something different can happen. And so for me, that's like a fundamental idea of doing art projects with others, which is at the heart of everything I do, is to think about how do we get everybody's desires represented? How is that possible? And how do we create platforms? How do we create like methodologies or workshop exercises or the right questions to ask to start to make that connection happen, so we can start to do like this kind of movement away from a situation we're in to something we want to be in. And this is just a picture. So the way I do it is through listening. I call my curatorial practice actually a practice of listening. I'm really interested in the idea that we as artists, or we as curators or arts organizers, that we're actually just creating platforms to be different, creating a space, creating a moment to land differently with the world and think differently. And in order to do that, I think you need to really have a real strong practice of listening. And I think for me, like listening it's not just a way to be a better friend or a better human being or something, but it's actually a way to be able to reach the other person, to understand really where somebody else is coming from, and to be able to facilitate that for groups of people is something I'm really interested in. I do think as well change needs imagination, but it also needs collective. It needs many desires moving towards a goal rather than one individual. And I think we're really educated in all capitalism to really believe we're on our own, that artists are by themselves, alone in the studio, just kind of in their own world. And I think we're really trained to understand that. But I really believe we're always in a collective movement. Whether we're starting from our studio, there's always a moment where the work lands in the world. And so I'm really thinking about listening as a really important step in that process. So I'm going to talk now through a few projects because I've been quite theoretical to now. Are there any questions before I move on? I can't quite see everybody. No?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah. Go on.
I'm really interested in that practice of or listening as an art practice in itself, in its own right. I'm sort of really interested in listening as a mode of communication. Well, is that something that kind of plays its part in your practice?
Definitely. So I think I've worked many times with, a lot of the time I will commission artists that work with sound primarily. Listening to the City was actually a project I did last year, where we commissioned artists to work with communities to develop little radio plays. But listening, I think, I can give an example. I don't actually have slides related to it. I'm just kind of whizzing through to see if I do, but I'm pretty sure I don't. I don't. But I worked with these artists called Ultra Red for many years. We actually worked in a school, St. Marylebone School, really amazing school that had for a while a really visionary head that really centered arts in the curriculum. And so we were working just around the time where art started to get cut in schools. So this was between 2009 and 2013. And we worked with a collective called Ultra Red. So they started out as a needle exchange in the 90s in LA. So they're activists first, and they would record protests, and then they would create records and dance tracks to these protests, AIDS like the AIDS awareness protests in the 90s. And then they realized that actually the arts and art museums provided a space where they, who are multi-hyphenated people, who are activists, who are musicians, who are DJs, who are producers, who are community activists, that they actually could find a home in arts institutions. And so we worked with them for a really long time because they had developed a method of collective listening And I can share afterwards a link to their website. They provide a lot of exercises. All of you are art practitioners. I'm always looking for art exercises, what to do with a group, how to start a conversation going. So they're just a wealth of stuff. So they have a protocol. I'll talk to it very quickly, but they have a protocol where we can all be a group of people. They send us out to record sounds. Maybe we're all art teachers. We want to talk about the situation of not being able to be as creative as we want to be in our school. We record these sounds. We come back together. We listen to each other's sounds. And through a kind of holding process, we would then write what we heard. So they'll always say a question like, what is the sound of gentrification? Or what is the sound of young people losing spaces together, for example, and then we could listen together and then reflect together on what happened, what we all heard, and from there we're able to come to a kind of analysis together and create an action. And yes, that would often involve sounds and producing sound that other people would then hear, and then this project could turn into many things. I've worked with sound in so many different ways. I mean, for me, it's also a really important way to quickly go into a more embodied way of being, because we're able to, privilege this sense for a moment, and understand that we're collectively listening and that we all listen in different ways. I think understanding that is really one of the things that are really important to bring out whenever you're doing listening processes, is to understand that listening is a space, a political space, where you may hear something different than me, and us talking about it is the space to meet each other. And somehow you're able to do that in listening projects. I will definitely share some of their protocols, because it's very easy to bring into your own space as well. I'm going to quickly talk to this project. We use listening as well, but I mentioned this word embodied. So I'm also a theatre of the oppressed practitioner. I'm a joker. They call them jokers. I'm a facilitator of this kind of theatre called Theatre of the Oppressed, which for those of you who know Paulo Freire will know that this is completely influenced by Paulo Freire. It's a type of theater by Augusto Boal. So when I said my references come from radical pedagogy and histories of social movements, this is what I mean. So we bring in this type of political theater and we do projects with all kinds of groups. This project has been going on for about 10 years. It's called Implicated Theater, and it started out as a project where we were going to make a film about an immigration raid in an Egyptian cafe on the Edgware Road. And it turned into a 10-year-long theater project where different migrant groups come together and they support other migrant organizations or newly arrived refugees to find ways to assimilate or settle in to their new life in the UK. And the reason we use this type of theatre is because it doesn't privilege language, even though I'm showing you one of the ones where we have signs. But usually it's about listening, it's about feeling, it's about looking at images, and it's about finding a way to work with people that may not speak the same language as you, but to create artworks together that tell stories about their perspective, but they're also stories that help to change other people's own experiences of the world. I wanted to show here very quickly. This was a 3-year project that implicated theatre. We started to work with English as a second language teachers, teaching them how to use this form of theatre in their own classroom, in their everyday, to maybe jumpstart a more direct conversation about everyday life, so that they're not sitting in the classroom learning how to buy a ticket to Edinburgh and stuff like that, but they're able to actually talk about the stuff going on in their lives with the people in the classroom, even though their English might not be so strong. So this is a method I'm really interested in doing, which is taking projects I'm doing with small groups of people in closed workshops and amplifying that through sharing methodologies, through publications and little guides of how to bring things into your own classroom and make people feel confident that they can start to bring in these other, learn new practices in really quick ways, accessible ways that can they can bring into their own ways of working, whether or not it's bringing it into an art context or not. I'm just going to keep talking, right? I'm going to just talk through projects. Is this okay? Yeah. Please say if you get bored, because I'll just keep going because I've worked on so many.
No, this is brilliant. This is exactly what we want. And please, everyone else in the room, I've got so many questions, but I don't want to always be that person that's asking them. So if anybody else wants to dive in.
Yeah, I mean, I can just keep talking because what I'm going to do now, I think for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to speak through a few different projects I've done and maybe a little bit of the house, and then maybe we can have a bit of a conversation. I'd love to know if people are doing similar work or are interested in working outside of their work context or their own studio context as well, because these are projects that really speak to that type of work. So as you can tell, I'm very interested in social issues and thinking about how art can be part of this not intervening, but being part of telling the story of things that are going on in the world. This project is one of about 15 that I've done in care homes. I've been working in care settings since 2009, placing artists in long-term residencies in care settings. So I've worked in hospitals, I've worked in care homes, I've worked in hospices. I'm working in sheltered housing as well. At Cubit, I'm running 4 studios that are based in the heart of a care home, for example, and thinking about different ways that we can actually interact with institutions and other kind of settings that are doing a lot of work with people. And I think care settings are really, for me, I do have always worked with elders. I really, I feel like the question of care in this country, just like the arts being, attacked a lot in the last decade, I think we can also say the care system suffered a lot in the last 10 years. And a lot of the provisions that were cut were creative activities and just activities in general. Anything that was allowing a connection between residents and the outside world were being really hit by the cuts. So I felt really strongly that we had to run a really strong program where we had artists based for multiple years. I'm really interested in long relationships that we build with people, because I believe in only with trust you can actually make something happen. And often arts organizations will be like, oh, here's a 3-month workshop series, but actually you need a 3-year workshop series to talk about the issue you want to talk about. So anyway, this is a project that Anton Katz, an amazing Ukrainian artist, he did in a care home. So he worked in the care home for 3 years. He was paid by us as an artist, but he would spend 1 day a week for 3 years with a care home that was undergoing privatization. And so he made lots of different works. This particular still is from a film he did, where he put GoPro cams on the staff, residents, cleaners, anybody working in the care home. And he edited it together and it became a film that just sat in the front of the care home, and later went on to become training materials for care homes all over Westminster, because it basically just showed in 10 minutes in this kind of sped up film, just the different speeds that people move around the care home in. And just that simple fact started to just illustrate to everybody in the care home that all of these people here are doing different things and experiencing the space in a different way. And there just became a different form of respect or understanding of everybody's experience in this shared space. And somehow this artwork then became a training material for the care homes, for the person doing the training for new assistants, just to talk about that. And I think, yeah, I just wanted to share that there, because I'm just thinking also about not that art should be utilized. I think art can have many, many different homes. And so I just wanted to share that particular story. I also wanted to share this project. So this project is actually led by my colleague, Alex Thorpe, and she's been doing a series of workshops called Cracks in the Curriculum. And it's really been it's a really fun way to work with others. And it's like a way to engage with an exhibition, taking themes from the exhibition, but also thinking about how art can be experienced in less obvious ways. Cracks in the Curriculum emerges also from this idea that teaching in schools is becoming very restricted, and there's like a loss of freedom in what you can do in a classroom a little bit, just because of how the curriculum is very demanding. And so Cracks in the Curriculum was a space for us to interact with other educators within the guise of doing a workshop around an exhibition, another artist's work, but to actually start to talk about what are the cracks in the curriculum, and what kinds of activities, what kind of workshop can we have with educators to give ideas, to collect ideas from educators to share with other educators of how we can start to talk about different things that aren't in the curriculum, that teachers felt important to bring into the curriculum, and ways to bring it in. So an example here is poetry in the personal. So we worked with Octavia, who are a collective of poets here in London, and they were really interested in Key Stage 3 and the lack of Black and Brown writers and female writers featured in Key Stage 3 literature, for example. So they did a whole workshop on poetry and introduced all of this young poetry, and yeah, it just became this toolkit that the educators put together with the artists, and then that went out to like all these other schools as well. So just thinking about the different ways that you can be in solidarity with people also in your field, and how like art can actually be a really great space to have conversations about everything. This is a project, I'm not going to speak so much about this project, but if anybody wants a copy of this book, I can. This is a project we did with Adelita Husni Bey, incredible artist who also uses theatre of the oppressed in her practice. But we've been working a lot with SEN parents and SEN early years centers that are feeder schools for other SEN schools in the area, in and around the Serpentine. But this was a book that the artist developed with the parents of the kids in the school, kind of like talking about SEN provision and isolation. And we turned like a club that was like a support network for these parents somehow into a space to do workshops. And in the end, we produced this beautiful book. So if anybody would like a copy of the book, also do let Laura know, and I can mail some out to you guys. There's so many different projects, but yeah, there's lots of ways. I mean, I showed you at the beginning the map, but I literally was based in the street. I know all of the guys on the street now. They knew me for 5 years. I mentioned at the beginning, I grew up in the Middle East. So I grew up in a place where we didn't have galleries and museums. I mean, we have loads of those now, but there used to not be that. So for me, I really grew up feeling like everyone in the public can be an artist and can experience art. And there isn't like a special people that can understand art and go to a museum and they're very special and different. And I feel like that culture is a little bit here. Like, I know all museums are open and free, but when I do a lot of work in schools and in community centers, a lot of people don't believe that they have they're allowed to come to the Serpentine, or that it's for them, or any museum for that matter. So I was really interested in doing a lot of interventions on the street, and a lot of the things I've shown you were performed and delivered outside of the Serpentine. It's always happening in a community center, in a club, anywhere. It's just kind of like, I'm really thinking about how art can be everywhere. I mean, this was a performance we did with an artist called Alia Farid. I won't talk so much into it, but you know, we did lots of readings on the street, and yeah, lots of different.
Amal, there
Yeah.
seems to be there seems to be a kind of a re-interest in social engagement and visual art in places that are unusual. That, you know, that this is not a new thing, is it? You know, in the 90s there was a lot of people exhibiting in warehouses, and you know, if we look at the YBAs were doing it with Frieze, and it's been a lot of change, but it seems to be a resurgence of that people are more interested in alternative spaces for exhibiting, as opposed to a white cube gallery, or you know, a gallery with white spaces, and in doing so that attracts people from the community and people who feel that galleries and museums and exhibitions don't have a place for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting shift, and I guess there seems to be a need to make the community and people aware that this is something that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think unless you get to experience it as a member of the community, I think it's very hard to imagine you can, or that it is for you. And I think also working in London. So I've had this very particular experience of working in London. Like 15 years ago, I did do it, and I did it in Cairo, and it was so different in Cairo, because you're talking about like a different sense of time, free time also that people have. And I think it's interesting that you just mentioned that idea of the 90s and like art being in different places back then. But I feel like we're in a similar moment now. When we first did Edgware Road, Centre for Possible Studies, that kind of project space that I mentioned, I didn't mention also we commissioned 65 projects. We made 4 exhibitions, artworks. There are 3 books that came out. There were loads of things that came out of that period of time. But it started out in 2008-9, and that was when the last crash was, the last recession. And there was suddenly this like availability of shop fronts. There was a high street revitalization scheme happening. So the Centre for Possible Studies was 3 places, 3 sites. One was George Michael's former favorite restaurant. It's not like Pigeons, and it was like it was like a really old restaurant that was in between owners or something, and then we got it for a minute. We also were in the Queen Mum's former hairdressers at Porchester Place. That was really cool. We made a film lab out of the salon. So we were in a salon, and then the picture that you saw was a townhouse that the developer had pulled out because of the recession. So it was just like a 4-story townhouse. And now it's like a really posh members club. We got kicked out, and it's turned into this really posh members club that I can never get into. So yeah, but I think we're in a similar moment now. So because I also work at Qubit, I've just suddenly found myself in a similar position to that time, where people were approaching us, councils were approaching artists, they're looking for art, they're looking for people to occupy spaces. And I think you'll find all over the country there's going to be opportunities to do something different.
Yeah, I think definitely I'm feeling it here in Little Norwich. You know, we are becoming much more interested in utilising spaces, and there are a lot of kind of empty derelict spaces at the moment. You know, shops and I can't think of anything else at the moment, but there's a lot of shops. But I think there's a really interesting move towards making work to respond to those spaces rather than creating work for a gallery space, or for you know, making work for a space that already exists. And I think that's a really nice way of encouraging the community to be part of that, isn't it? And to take note of what's going on around them in those spaces that are familiar to them, and they walk past them every day, and they might have been they might have known them as something else, but I think it's a really nice way to get other people involved who wouldn't normally be. And that's a really great thing for the arts, isn't it? Particularly for visual art.
I think so. I feel like I'm seeing some comments also. Ooh.
Empty shop.org.
Yeah,
emptyshop.org, exactly.
It speaks volumes as well, doesn't it, Jen, for the festival? I know that part of our programming this year, you know, there's a call out for artists to utilise those exact shop fronts. So it's happening.
Yeah, no, definitely.
It's a dream to have a shop front. I definitely enjoyed having a shop front. It does make a huge difference in terms of what was able to happen. So when we had a shop front, when we were in the salon, former salon, we ran this we wanted to make a film about the neighborhood with as many people as possible, and we gave free film classes, and from those film classes actual film, it was 8mm. So we did all this training, and like people made this collective film. 65 people contributed to a film called On the Edgware Road, and we screened it at the Serpentine afterwards. But the fact that it was on a shop front meant we definitely had people walking in all the time, and people were just curious that there are these like people just doing whatever they were doing, like drawing on the wall and gathering and listening to things together. And it just created like a new community very quickly. And I feel like, especially after everything we've all experienced in the world over the last 2 years, the space, creating spaces like that, or us as artists kind of stepping out in the world and sharing a little bit more, but maybe not only to soapbox, but to also just be like, what about thinking together about something, you know, like that. There are lots of different ways we can do it, but I think people are hungry for that. I'm just imagining what this summer is going to be like here, and just everybody coming out again. I mean, obviously cautiously, because whatever the government says, the pandemic is still a thing and still exists.
Yeah.
So I mean, I know, but I feel like there's so much people want to say and hear and receive and think about the world. And a lot of people are reimagining themselves and what they want to do in their lives. I feel like there's like a really strong flavor of that at the moment. And it's just because of what we've all gone through. So I feel like there's a need to kind of connect. And I feel like social media, news, being glued to our phones all the time, like all of these things that, you know, that's just our everyday now. What would happen if artists were able to facilitate a completely different relationship to the city?
So fascinating. I've got a bank of questions that I'd like to ask you, because it relates really closely to my own practice, but I'm going to throw it out there to the room. Would anybody else like to talk to Amal or ask her anything, or just start a conversation? Susan.
Well, you know, Amal, when you think about humankind, that's how art and music developed, with kind of our ancestors, wasn't it? Whether they were painting on a cave wall or making musical instruments out of a bone of an animal, that was all about sharing. And it's just that we've come full circle into valuing how art is a glue that sticks things together and people together. And we shouldn't really even have to apologize for that, should we? We should just go out and take over the world.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for saying it in that super clear way, because I feel like that's just it. I feel like there's been all of these layers of the institution or the way in which we're supposed to engage with or receive, but it's actually such an innate
Yes.
instinctual thing to do. And I think what was it? Deschooling Society. There's a really great book called Deschooling Society by Ivan Illich. Really recommend it. But I've been thinking about this a lot. It's like, how do we unlearn these ways of being, which just created the world that wasn't making us feel very good just now?
Mhm.
And we've had a moment of pause. How do we rewrite where we want to be? And already, because we're artists, everyone in this room is an artist, there's like a different kind of empathy we have with the rest of the world. It's like innate a little bit more because we're used to doing it. So it's like, I feel there's a need to support others to do that right now.
Yes.
Do you think that art can enable social change?
I've based a lot of my career on this. No, I don't. I don't think it, like, art alone cannot do it, but it depends on what kind of change you're talking about. But I feel like it's a really important space. I think maybe more than describing it as art, I think it's about the ability to imagine. So years ago, my partner is from Detroit, and his best friend is an amazing writer called Adrienne Marie Brown. She's written books like Emergent Strategy, really recommend. Also pleasure activism, remember your pleasure, pleasure is revolution, maybe pleasure will change the world, right? But she also wrote this anthology many years ago on science fiction. It's called Octavia's Brood, and it was basically inviting social justice, social movement, like people whose whole life is fighting for change. She did some workshops with these social movement organizers over a year and facilitated them to write science fiction stories about the thing they want to change. And through these workshops, they created an anthology of books, a book called Octavia's Brood, and it was science fiction for social movements. And at the top, the quote says, "All organizing is science fiction." And that for me is this whole idea. So the art world as it stands, and education and all of these institutions, they're all here they're built to make the status quo, like all of our government and our structures and our systems, it's just there to reinforce that, basically. And as artists, I think we don't have to play this game. we are able to say, we can reflect things in a different way. We don't have to support the status quo. So we have a choice. We can either uphold the status quo, or we can question it and support people to question it, or to offer alternatives, or to offer people the ability to even imagine there's an alternative. And so in that way, I do think artists are needed for revolution. But yeah, it's just, I think there's a really great way to think about this, is that our reality, like whatever's going on in Russia and Cold War and working 6 days a week and not getting to see your family, not being able to have a kid because you feel like you have to work, like all of these things, these were all created through somebody's imagination. Enough people imagine that that is the future. And so she always says this thing that as artists, it's our right and our responsibility to write ourselves a new future. And I just love that. I love that that is something we hold. It's an ability we hold as artists to write new futures. And when you are a social, I work with domestic worker unions. I'm a union organizer. I used to be the union organizer at SERP. Like, I do lots of stuff with social movements. And when you're always doing stuff to change, it's really hard to imagine anything else. It's almost like you're focused so much on the reality that you want to change, that you don't give yourself a chance to imagine something else. And I think all of us do that in our life.
Oh, Amal, we could do this forever. This is so fascinating. I wish that we could do this for a whole, well,
I really wish I could hear more about what all of you guys do.
Well, most people in the room are educators. Would anybody like to jump in? Lots of people have turned that it's tea time, isn't it, with people and kids? And would anybody else like to jump in? This has been so amazing, Amal. I really hope that now I've got your contact through Laura. I'd love to be able to talk to you more in more detail, and I'm sure there'll be other people in a similar position. I know that Susan and I talk a lot about the state of the world and politics and the place of art in our society, and I know that both of us will have a fascinating conversation after this. Just because we've got to round it up, those who are in the room, would you just be happy to pop something into the Jamboard with some feedback from Amal's session, or something that you'd like to hear more about, or anything that any thoughts and ideas from today's program, today's session for this program? Would really appreciate it. I think Izzy is going to pop it into the chat box now, if she hasn't already. We'd love to just see your faces one more time, everybody, if you're still there, you're still with us. And we'd like to just say a huge thanks to Amal for sharing those such fascinating projects and really interesting insight into the type of practice that you have. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thank you. It's so nice to meet you guys. And thank you, Laura. So sweet to connect with you in this way and to meet all of you and hear about this amazing program. I think it's really, I just imagining lots of revolutionary things to come. So I'll come and visit. Oh, please do. Yeah, come any other sessions if you want to, or look back in our archive and look at our other stories. But we're trying to develop this this community of artist educators who want something a bit different. So yeah, hopefully that you can connect with us again. So thank you very much. It's gone past 6, and see you hopefully all again tomorrow night if you're around. Bye guys. Thanks very much. Bye.